Good afternoon. My name is Macarena Flores Whipple, teacher of the English program at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Valparaíso. Today we welcome you to the last presentation of the first of 2 days of a webinar for ESL, EFL teachers at PUCV, Digital Learning and Teaching, Promoting Students' Autonomous Learning. This presentation will last approximately 30 minutes, during which you will be able to write your question to our speaker using the Zoom chat. The question will be answered during the 10 minutes allotted at the end of the presentation. Don't forget to share your question with all attendees. I would like to introduce the speaker for this session, Mr. Sebastián Arriagada. He is an English teacher for primary and secondary education, Master in Inclusive Education, Google Certified Trainer, and Innovator. As a classroom teacher, most of his experience is associated to the first levels of schooling, including the use of technologies and developing learning experiences associated with programming while learning English as a foreign language. In addition, he has worked as a consultant for the English Open Doors program of the Chilean Ministry of Education on topics that incorporate technology to achieve learning in English teaching, such as the English Coding Camps 2019 and the speaking workshops from 5th to 8th grade. During his last couple of years, he has shared with different schools in the country, ranging from private to public centers, focusing on the development of technological skills in teachers. Currently, he works in the Department of Education of the Salesiano School Networks as the technological educational leader, supporting the school in pedagogical digital grounds and managing diverse projects that impact on digital competencies within the schools. Without delay, I leave you with our speaker, Sebastián Arriagada.
Thank you, Macarena, for the introduction. Welcome everyone to this final session of this event. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I want to share with you. I'm really excited to be here. I think that inclusion is one of those topics that we don't usually talk that much as we should and as we must do. So being invited to talk about school inclusion, special needs, especially linked to technology, and how English learning plays a role in these three different aspects that are absolutely present in today's education. When we think about today's education, it's all about technology and digital work. So it's an honor to be here, and I hope that we all talk and learn a lot about this experience. So if anyone can just say everything is okay, you can see my screen correctly, you can listen to me correctly. So if that's okay, I think we are ready to go. Perfect. Thank you, Maribel, Claudia, Carla, excellent. So as I was saying before, this is the last part of this webinar. We are going to talk about digital learning and school inclusion, and especially about designing experiences for all students. I know that we already heard about my introduction, but I want to be really transparent and clear, honest with everyone. And as I'm going to share with you, I'm not a researcher, but what I have done for a couple of years is to work with education and technology, integrating those two elements in my own teaching experience, and also designing different projects for the Ministry of Education. And today I'm working in Salesianos, Chile, and part of that is also related to my Google for Education Academy as an innovator. So this is my background, this is my knowledge that I want to share. And I think that it's really worth sharing because this is a hot topic that we must address. So the goal of today is to discuss the importance of inclusion, school inclusion in our classrooms. And not only talk about inclusion, because we are not just any type of teachers, we are English teachers. And so this webinar, this presentation is going to relate technology, educational needs, and language learning, specifically speaking English language learning. So to begin with this conversation, I just would love to present some documents or guidelines that we as teachers should be aware of. And these are part of international and national documents that help us see through the educational experience with different lens. So on the one part, we have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So we are not working with anyone, we are working with children and teenagers. And these children and teenagers have a right to get an education that facilitates the child's active participation in the community. So when we are talking about this webinar on autonomy, we have to talk about participation. Can anyone be autonomous without actually practicing participation or being an active member of a community? I think that is a important factor that we have to consider. But we already know that from international grounds, we must provide an education that facilitates the child's active participation. And not only internationally speaking, we also have a law, a specific law, that says that we should eliminate all forms of arbitrary discrimination, but not just because discrimination is bad. I mean, that is obvious, but there is something that happens with those arbitrary forms of discrimination, and that is that they hinder our students' learning and participation. So we say, surely our students should participate, and then we say, pay attention to the discrimination arbitrary that may happen. So look at those two elements. And finally, there is a final document also by the UN that is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So specifically speaking, yes, this is a child. Yes, it's in their schooling years. Now we have to look specifically at what are their rights as a person with any type of disability. And in that sense, we as Chileans are part of this state that said we are going to follow the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from 2008 onward. And basically what we are saying is that we are going to make as many steps as we can to ensure that there are reasonable accommodation for our students and people in general to participate. So everyone deserves and everyone is entitled to participate in their communities. On the other side, as in school inclusion, they say pay attention to any arbitrary discrimination factors that may arise in our school context. And then specifically speaking on people with disabilities, you have to ensure reasonable accommodation. And that is one of the things that we will talk eventually. What is a reasonable accommodation? So this is what the data and the information is saying from these international national documents. But what is really happening in our schools? When we think about students with disabilities, there is no much information about it, sadly, I have to say. But there are two studies by Senadis, that is the specific area of the state that looks after all people with disability. And we can see clearly here that school attendance, and that's a basic factor for our students, being present, being at the school so that they have a chance to learn. When we look at our students with disabilities, we can see that in their years 6 to 13, they have a pretty solid attendance. I mean, it's not ideal. It is certainly under our students without disabilities average, but at least it has a high percentage of attendance. But then something happens when it goes to high school education. It just drops, and it drops sharply. So now we could say from the data from 2015 that students with disabilities in high school only attend half of the academic year. And then we should ask ourselves, not only as teachers, but as part of this society, what is happening in these schools and everywhere that students with disabilities, specifically speaking, have access to a classroom. Basically, you can sit there, you have a seat. And then as years go on, these students stop going to school. Is it because the families are saying, oh, this education is not appropriate this education is not giving my child, my son or daughter, an education that they deserve? Or is it also maybe because our schools are not designed for these students, are friendly students actually. So so schools are designing classes for the default student. And here we are saying that there are some students that are not part of this default vision. So there is a real context on the education that they're receiving. So we should be paying attention to that. Sadly, I don't really have any type of recipe to fix this issue, but we collectively can at least participate in the discussion and propose certain collective answers as institutions so that we can ensure an education for everyone. To understand this problem, I would like to start separating two different concepts that are pivotal to our understanding of this topic. When we talk about students with special needs, we always think about disabilities. We think about something that is very rare. So you have the default student, and then you have your special needs student. But what is actually special need? Is it really special? Or is it special because we think that the only common or normal student is one that can see without any issues, or walk with their two legs, or grab things with both hands and 10 fingers, etc.? Is it because we think there is a default, or is it because they're really special? But when we look at national data, we see that they're not really special. Actually, if you think about Chilean society and you only look at adults from 18 years old plus, you would be amazed to realize that 20% of Chilean adult population have any type of disability. And that is in 2015. Today, we may even have a bigger amount of people with a disability. And this is just normal. I mean, anytime that we grow older, we will start losing the quality of our sight, or we will start feeling more tired or exhausted doing certain physical actions. So this is not about having special needs. It's about having specific needs in a specific moment in your life. So when we are talking on educational grounds, what we are saying is, surely there are students with specific needs. But what are those specific needs? So they are not special. And why do we think that they are special? And there is a reason to that. And the reason comes with this video that I hope that you can watch with me and pay attention to it.
Hello, I'd like to open a bank account. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. Access for everyone. When your world lights up, EDA.
So when we look at this video, when we watch this clip, we realize that we think there is a default. There is a default way of living. That means there is a special need because you need help crossing the street. But that's because our society built this crossing in the way that it is today. But if it was different, as in the video, would we be calling this a special need or not? Would the special need change? So when we talk about disabilities in general, we have to realize that the disability is not just part of the person. It's not something that comes with the person, but it's actually a multi-factor situation. So disability is defined as a biopsychosocial um, um, situation, let's say. So yes, there are things that happen in people's body, but also there is something very important that is going on in the context. So when the context changes, disabilities also change. some disabilities are not real disabilities when you start helping that person participate in society. So to put this in educational grounds, we would start talking about barriers. So basically what we are saying is that in our classrooms, in our context, there are certain things that stop our students from participating, or not, or not necessarily, you're not stopping our students participation, but you are making it way harder for them to succeed. So there are students in your classroom that are not having any issues with the design of your lesson, so they can just go straight to the goal. They know what to do, and you have provided all the materials necessary for learning, so they just do it. But then we have some other students that, because of their specific characteristics, it's not a special need, it's a specific need, they are struggling with your class. What barriers to learning do you think you can find in your classroom? If we only think about digital classrooms, what we have been living during the last 2 years, we might think, sure, the first barrier might be the gadget, having the appropriate gadget for being online. So those students who have appropriate gadgets will have an easier way and time in classrooms than those students who only have, for example, a cell phone, a mobile phone. But then let's think that this student gets a new phone, gets a bigger screen, or even a tablet. Is the problem solved? Most certainly, in terms of gadgets, that is solved. But then again, what other barriers might arise? You have another one that might be connection. Sure, now the student has a laptop, but the internet connection is pretty low. So basically, they cannot connect properly to your lesson. Are they going to participate as effectively as you wanted? Not really. And that changes student to student. And finally, let's say we did it. The students are having a great internet connection. They are having the appropriate tools. So what is the problem? Why are not all my students succeeding? Well, maybe there is another barrier that we are not seeing. For example, digital skills. If you are posing an activity for your students that implies having specific digital skills that these students do not have, they will struggle with the format of your activity instead of actually playing and participating, answering the questions, producing texts. That is the important thing that we should be focusing on, but instead our students struggle with technical issues. So when we think of our classrooms in terms of inclusion, there is a very important call, and that call is to identify barriers in your classroom. Okay, great, I identified all my barriers in my classroom. I am an inclusive teacher, checking boxes. But is it really something that you can achieve? Is there any real inclusive school out there? Not even in Chile. Let's talk about globally. What are inclusive schools? And can you become an inclusive school slash teacher? The belief of this inclusion paradigm is that you never get to the final line. You never get to the goal. The inclusion is not a final goal. Inclusion is a motivation to go further and further. And why is that? Because when we are talking about providing an appropriate education for our students, we are talking about breaking down those barriers that our students face. But again, barriers are contextualized. So basically, when you have a new group of students, barriers change. Maybe on your first semester or on your first academic year, you had a student, for example, with physical impairment. So you identify certain barriers and basically you fix the whole thing. Now my students can participate fully. I am an inclusive teacher. But then again, the next year you receive a student that comes from a foreign country and that person, that student does not speak the native language. So again, how do you deal with that? Thankfully, we are teaching English, and that means that we are all living in a foreign language. But at the same time, to get to English class, that student also has to go through Spanish, maths, science, and most probably if he or she, if they don't understand whatever is going on in your classroom, they're just gonna drop school and they're not gonna reach your English class. So what I'm saying here is, it is really important to talk about inclusion and to identify those factors that stop our students from fully participating. But let's be real, if we want to be inclusive, this is a never ending task. And that is okay, because that is our challenge as teachers and educators and people in general, to create a society that is just fair for everyone. Um, so we have talked, we have seen that barriers are important, and we have seen that inclusion is more of a very distant goal that we are not really reaching 100%, but we are just getting closer to it. But how? How do we get closer to it? So there are two specific ways in which we can tackle this problem. First, again, let's be real, our student is not just our student, is everyone's students in this school. So that means that it's not only your classroom that has to be inclusive, it is your school that has to be inclusive. And to do that, there is a brilliant document that was developed by 2002 that is called the Index for Inclusion. And this Index for Inclusion basically says that for you to have an inclusive school, you have to fulfill three criteria. And these criteria are these three dimensions. So you begin with the first one that is right here at the bottom, creating inclusive cultures. If we all don't believe on the same values, there is nothing that we can do for our students. So when we talk about inclusion, we talk about a shared view on inclusion. And once we know, and once we have created an inclusive culture in which respect, justice, solidarity, collaboration are key elements in this place, then we only can move to producing inclusive policies. This is not just about teacher A saying, I want to include my students. It has to be of everyone. And how do we make that happen? Well, we make policies so that we are all aligned to the same goal. And once we have produced these inclusive policies, we jump into the third part that is finally what we want, to evolve into inclusive practices. And this is not just any practice, this is the school practice. That means that it is a systemic way of seeing people as, first, diverse human beings, and second, as people that have an unalienable right to be there, and they deserve an education, and we have to help as much as we can to provide that education. But again, this is not about how administrators or principals can help our schools be more inclusive. This is about this is about us, sorry, as English teachers, to deal with this challenge. And when we think about the previous conventions, it says that we should provide reasonable accommodations for our students. But then we are living in Chile, again, where we have 40 plus students. So are you going to design a class that tackles 40 different specific needs? Well, if you can do it, you're certainly a superhero. But most of us cannot deal with that because it's just too much stress, and not only because there are 40 students, but because you have a lot of different classes. So what an inclusive approach says is that surely everyone has certain needs, specific needs. So what you could do to be more effective is to be preventive, is to use a universal design. So look at all the different needs and try to design a class that actually tackles most of our students' needs. So the more needs that are covered, the easier your classroom will be, not only for you, but for your students. So when we want our students to succeed, we create lessons that appeal to the most amount of, to most of our students. And how do we do this? How do we design a universal class? So here we have three different aspects that are critical to designing inclusive classrooms. First, there is a principle of engagement. How do we motivate our students? What is the reason why am I studying this? Why am I learning this? What is the importance? What is the relevance? And sometimes, most of the time, I would say, students do not know this. That is the job of the teacher, to provide meaning to an experience. And we have to engage our students to facilitate learning. If a student is not engaged in a class, most probably they're just going to listen to blah, 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 whatever we are saying, because it's not important. We have to make learning important. On the second principle, we have representation. Now we have our students' motivation. Great. So I have to show you something so you can react to it. How am I going to show that? And that is the what. What are we learning? And finally, we have the final principle, that is to provide multiple means of actions and expressions. How do our students show what they know? So how do we motivate them? How do we present information for them to react? And how do they show that they know? Those are the three big principles. And this is the moment in which I go through every single one of them and try to share some tips that I have found useful in terms of including technology for our learning goals. Um, so the first the first thing that we have to have in mind, to bear in mind when we are designing our class, was engagement. Why? And the why is made up by three different aspects in our lesson. First, interest. How do we place our students' interests in the core of the first part of the lesson? How do we know what's interesting for the student? Then we have persistent. How do we help this student that are already motivated? How does that student keep being motivated along the class and hopefully across the whole academic year? And finally, self-regulation. How does this student um, monitors his own motivation? So basically, there are a lot of tools that we can use to provide to our students. For example, if we are talking about interests, technology helps us a lot, because we can just make a post, create a task on Google Classroom, for example, that is a survey for students to complete at the beginning of the academic year. So welcome to this new class. My name is Teacher Sebastian, and these are the things that I like, and I would love to know the things that you like. So please make a comment below and tell me what is your favorite music or TV show or whatever that is interesting for you. And that is not only something that helps you see your class more clearly, but it's also a toolbox that you can use across the academic year. For example, if you want to tackle reading skills and you don't really find an appropriate text, maybe you can just go to this list of interests written by your students and see, you know what, a lot of these students love comics, so I will use that as part of my reading skills class. And you start building upon interests that you are not guessing, because sometimes we are terrible guessers. You are building your lessons with specific and real interests that were explicitly shared with yours by your students. Sorry. So that is a way in which you can gather information for motivation in your classroom. And then if you want to teach persistence, sorry, to your students, you can use a diverse set of tools, digital tools that can help you accommodate that need. And for example, there we have Jamboard and Padlet that are great tools for brainstorming. And then we also have self-regulation. What have you learned during this week? Surely there is something that we should promote in our students, that is to say, sorry, how do I learn? So I have to help my students know how they learn and how they behave, so that if they are feeling low, they can identify that feeling and say, well, I know that I didn't have a great morning this week. So although, I mean, regardless of that morning, I'll just try and do my best to stay engaged in this class. So for engagement, for this finding a purpose for your class, you can use different tools to find the interest of your students, to keep that motivation going on through the academic year, and to help them regulate their own feelings so that they can self-direct their motivation. Certainly, there are a lot of different tools that you can use for this purpose, but I think that these ones work just fine for what I have already explained before. In terms of the principle of representation, we are talking about the what. And here I have to say that English teachers are definitely champions, absolutely. Because in our methodology, we already incorporate a lot of elements that help our students read a text. If we are presented a reading in just text, most probably that's going to look like hieroglyphs for our students, especially those who do not really know that many words. And we know that our students need at least 70%, 70% plus of words to really and fully understand a text. So if they don't really get that much information from the text, that's going to be a huge wall for our students learning. So what we can do when we are working with texts is to include a lot of things that are part of the internet. For example, you can have a link or certain words linked to a picture dictionary. So you don't really want them to look up the word in Spanish, because that's not gonna help you build on learning and on knowledge. But certainly what you want them to do is to contrast that word that they do not know with a picture, because that way they can do that, they can create that they can create that connection between the word and the meaning. So you can use picture dictionaries online to engage with your students in that sense. You can even use some videos to reinforce the idea of this text, to give a context to the book or whatever paragraph we are reading. If we are reading the story, for example, of middle-aged people, maybe we can find a video that talks exactly about that, and that context will give us more clues on how to decode this paragraph. And also, you can use not only videos but also audiobooks or podcasts that again reinforce this same message. Do we want them to be able to specifically decode the message, or do we want them um, to make predictions about the text, or do we want them to understand key concepts from the text? So if that is our goal, if our goal is not just to go through the text, but actually deal with the information that is contained in that text, then we can vary the format in which we are presenting this information. And as it says here, perception, language, and comprehension are key elements for representation. If you know that students love a lot of movement, maybe you can go acting the reading as you are going through the lines. And that is another way of representing what is included in this text. And also, if you ask me about digital tools that help our learning materials to a higher level, I would definitely recommend you Genially, because in Genially you can create interactive text. So maybe when they click on the title, they can go to a different website that is part of the author's life. And then when you go to the picture, you could go switching the different pictures, part of the cover, so that they can have enough context to go into the different lines. Or if you have words that are really important to identify and know, you can create certain links to those words in which you have a picture, an idea that connects to that concept, and a Spanish translation, why not? That is also a possible solution that you might find. I'm not saying that that is the way to include the students in terms of comprehension and representation, but that is one possible way. Let's remember, this is about finding barriers. So if there are students who are really struggling with English, if they listen to us and everything in the classroom is in English, something is going to happen to that kid in terms of motivation and comprehension. So I'm not saying let's use Spanish in our lessons every day, but what I'm saying is sometimes there are some students that really require certain translation. And at the end of the day, is it about me as a teacher doing the class that I think is perfect, or is it about learners actually gaining access to this knowledge? So that is something that we should really pay attention to when we are dealing with the what. And the final dimension for this UDL principles is the how, the action and expression. How do our students show what they know? And to show what they know, they have to have multiple ways of doing that. Multiple ways as writing a text about the book that we just read, maybe through the use of Flipgrid, recording a video in which the students speak about the main characters and how they relate to each other. Or maybe they are going to create a poster that represents the climax of the book. They can create a presentation, for example, if they want to do an oral presentation. So basically what we are saying is include as many ways for students to show what they know. And also not only help them not only help them to make that product, but also help them organize themselves to find that goal. And one of the ways in which we can organize our students' lives and thoughts is using a calendar. So if you have a task or a project that is due um, in 3 weeks, let's say, let's make a calendar in which every week a student receives a reminder in which they can remember the different steps that are needed for this project, so that they have a constant idea in their mind saying, oh, I have to do this, I have to do this. And finally, after a lot of drilling, that does happen. So when we think about the how of learning, we think about diversity of expression. So the first one is finding diverse and multiple ways of motivating our students, finding diverse and multiple ways of presenting information for our students, and finding multiple ways for our students to show what they know and how to build on that. Um, so ideas to bear in mind in this context, there are two things that I would really love to share with you. First, let's remember that we are talking now about specific needs. And when we talk about specific needs, we say we are looking at every student in our class. But since it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work to design a class for 44 students, I'm going to use the universal design for learning to appeal to to the majority of our students in a way that I don't need too many adjustments for those students who might need specific support. So that is possible. What we are doing with universal design for learning is saying, I will try to do my best so that my students struggle with as few barriers as they can. But that does not mean that they are not going to face barriers. There are some students who really need a specific support. For example, students who have um, physical impairments for physical education class, they are going to need a specific support for that exercise if we want our students to fully participate in the class. In terms of English language, if we are having a listening activity, for example, we must provide a specific support for those students who might be deaf in the classroom. So there is something going on in my classroom between the context and the student. And with universal design for learning, what we are doing is trying to appeal to the majority of the classroom while acknowledging that there are some students that still might need some specific supports. But those specific supports are not for you to provide, because let's remember that you are not alone in the classroom and you are not alone in the school. There is a specific team in the school, at least in Chile, that deals with these specific supports. So what you should be doing is to prepare for this universal design for learning as much as you can as the English teacher. But if you require more help from a specialist, then please ask that specialist to go with you into the classroom and help you provide those specific needs to the students. But while you're using universal design for learning, this is a process. Let's remember, you won't be able to be that inclusive teacher, like the perfect, most engaging teacher of all times. But what we can do is to move forward to that ideal. And to do that, again, consider these three questions when designing your own presentation for your classes, your own learning experiences. First, am I providing multiple ways for students to feel motivated? Am I providing multiple ways for students to understand what I'm presenting? And am I providing multiple ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge? Please tackle one of these at least. I know this is hard. There is a lot of thinking and producing and creating things when we think of a universal class, but you can start with one principle. And as you go on, you can start adapting to this first principle. And now you think, oh, I know how I can motivate my students. I'll just gather their interests. That is okay. Check. But now that I know that that is okay, I have to move forward to the next level. How do I help our students understand and comprehend the information that I'm presenting? So go step by step. This is a long journey. So please be kind with yourself. Sorry, be kind with yourself, because most of us did not have this inclusion perspective and methodology as part of our training teacher. As our student training teachers. But what we can do is to learn from that and help and ask for help, to the appropriate people that are the people that work with specialists, and they have a lot of tools that are not part of an English teacher, but you can certainly ask for help to those more prepared specialists. And regardless of that idea, you can still do certain changes that impact your class. For example, if you're working on your digital classroom, please make your class materials available beforehand. If you know that there are some students who struggle with the internet connection, if you upload a video on Monday and your class is on Wednesday, those students that know that when you play a video in the class, they just lose their connection will say, surely, I have the video, I'll just watch it today. And when the class comes on Wednesday, I'll be prepared for that. And if they didn't encounter that connection issue, even better, because they are reinforcing the information that they need to succeed in that class. But what we don't want to happen is to show a video in our lesson and then have some students not being able to access to that information. Because if the student cannot access the first part of your lesson, the motivation, the pre of your class, most certainly they will not know how to handle the rest of the class. So make class materials available as soon as you can. The more you encourage interaction, the better. And interaction is a huge term. So when we are talking about digital interaction, we are not only talking about speaking. We can also just use typing. Or maybe we could use, for example, Kahoot, I'm just saying, to make certain options regarding a question that you asked orally. And why is that? Because there are some students who feel really threatened to speak in class. There is something going on in their minds that says, please don't do it. Don't do it. Danger, danger. And it is way safer for them just to type their answers in the chat or click an option in that Kahoot, Mentimeter, whatever software you're using. They feel safe. Their participation is visible in your classroom, and now that you have more people participating and more interaction in your classroom, that means that you have more information regarding your next class. Oh, today a lot of students participated, and I noticed that most of them knew how to find specific information in a text. So that means that I can build on that knowledge. But if I don't have any information, because I just say, please speak, please talk, and students don't speak, then you are lost and your students are lost. So what we are trying to do is to facilitate things, not to make things harder. So if speaking is an issue, just provide other types of interaction in your learning environment. And if that interaction means typing, that is okay. We will grow for them. We will grow from there. Now that you're going to hybrid learning, please become familiar with the equipment in advance. It's going to be super confusing. It's going to be complicated, and that is okay. So, you are going to encounter technical issues. That's okay, but please check beforehand your gadgets, your computers, internet connection, whatever you can prevent it. That's not going to mean that the class is going to be perfect, but at least you will do the best so that certain barriers will not stop our students from participating. When we talk about presenting information, present bullet information, not a full text, just clear, concise ideas. And when we are designing our presentations, check for color contrast, because there are some students who have certain issues seeing letters that are not really visible when you have a dark background and a dark type of font and color for that font. So basically what you are trying to do is make things as accessible as you can. So to conclude with this idea, I would like to tackle two final aspects. First, as a teacher, we have to provide a learning experience for all our students, not only for our default students that we think it's default, but it's not, but also for the rest of the students, with or without a diagnosis. Because some people say, oh, I need the diagnosis for this student that apparently is part of the autism spectrum, but I'm not quite sure, so I'm not going to do anything unless I have the document. But that's not okay, because you already know that student, you know their needs. If you took time to actually engage with your class, you would know what kind of issues might arise when presenting your class with your student. So if we really want to have a learning experience that is designed for everyone, we have to be preventive. What factors may arise for our students so that we can create that inclusive classroom? And that means reflecting on the principles of UDL. But the weight, it should not be, at least, on your shoulders. This is a collective work. This is collective efforts. So if we genuinely want to become an inclusive school, that means that it has to be built on an inclusive culture that leads to an inclusive policy that finally becomes an inclusive practice. It is amazing. It's really amazing that you are here trying to learn on how to teach your students with specific needs. But it is not your responsibility as an individual teacher. It is a collective responsibility. And that means that administrators and principals really need to check the index for education if they need further guidance on how to build that inclusive community. And finally, I wanted to share some websites that are really interesting when talking about inclusive education. We have the guidelines for writing about people with disabilities, online tools about the UDL, a Chilean Center for Inclusion Technologies, a document to check your accessibility tools in all your software gadgets, and finally, a dual wheel that shows you all the UDL principles with specific technologies that you could use. So I'm just gonna show that wheel because I love it. And I'm going to leave all these links in the chat so that you can have access to them. So here you have this dual wheel 2.0 It is divided by the different principles of UDL. And in every single principle, you will find specific software or apps that will help you appeal to your students' specific needs. So I'm sorry I cannot give you a recipe for all your students, but what I can tell you is that if you appeal to these three principles, your students will succeed. And if they are not succeeding today, they will certainly succeed in the future because this is a process. So I'm going to copy these links and I will leave them specifically in the chat so that you can all have access to it. There you are. And now I'm reading a lot of other websites that are really important, but I will leave Macarena, sorry for the delay, for the questions.
There's no problem. Thank you very much, Sebastián, for your presentation. It was such an interactive presentation. Actually, we had plenty of comments on chat and also questions. You have two questions. I'm going to combine Maritza and Carolina's. Okay, could you recommend a technology tool for students with special needs in elementary school? And how can you include blind students?
So being aligned with this presentation, it is hard for me to recommend tools for special needs because every student has a different specific need. So what I can say is that you look at the specific needs of your students. If we are talking about students who for blind students with little vision, with short vision, sorry, that is the concept, students with short vision, there are a lot of accessibility tools in your computer. If you go to basically any type of document, I'm gonna show you, give me one sec. I think you can see that my Word tool is open. Is it, can you see it on the board?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. So when we include different pictures in a document in this Word tool, you will find that you can write an alternative text. So alternative text is something that you can make to represent that picture that you have. So for example, let me take this picture. It should be there. Okay. So when we go to this picture, we will find that there are some options. Give me one sec. Here it is. It's in Spanish. It might be a little, but it says alternative text. So if you really have students, blind students, that means that they will need a specific device for every single document that you will present to them. And that means that they have to be knowledgeable about all those devices. So what you have to do in every single material is whenever you add a picture to that material that reinforces the idea of the text, you write an alternative text. So I would say, boy jumping with their arms at the back, let's say. So when you create that description.
Sorry, Sebastián, I think that you need to take to share the other screen because you are presenting the PowerPoint. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Let me go again. There you are. Sorry about that. So I was saying that when you have texts. Okay, first, let me organize my ideas. First, special needs is a very wide concept. So when we talk about specific needs for those students with short vision, what we want to do is to make accessible every single material that we have. Not only presentations, but also documents, because they also need to encounter documents in real life. We are preparing students for real life participation. So when they face documents, when we include pictures, we have to go to that picture and click on edit alternative text. This means that whenever the students are working with their text-to-speech device, the text-to-speech device is going to go through all your text and say, hey, this is a picture, but I know that you cannot see the picture, so I'm going to describe. what the picture looks like. And that is your job as a teacher. So here, whenever you add a picture to your work, you write, for example, as I was saying, boy jumping with their arms at the back. And you create that description. So now this text that you will, for example, let's say this is a short story, this text will include a picture that is also accessible for those students who struggle with visuals. When we are talking about specific Google tools, if you go to tools, you will find the accessibility settings. And in accessibility settings, you can find the magnifier for students that need to zoom in a lot of times, or you can even contrast the colors of your screen. So to answer this question, what I'm saying is there are just so many ways of including students with different needs, but there is no way that I can offer you a specific tool because it depends on your learning materials. But what I can say is that in this presentation, I shared with you a link to Are You Accessible? And when we go into this Are You Accessible, it includes a lot of articles from Apple products, Google products, Microsoft products, in which they teach you how to find those accessibility tools for that specific extra support for your student. So this student has a specific need, and this specific need can be supported or covered, sorry, with help of technologies. So I think that is my answer. I know it's not the most perfect answer, but I think that accessibility tools is one of the things that we must know as teachers.
Okay, here you have more questions. What do you think is the reason why integration has been so slow in school? Is it fear or a lack of teaching about the issue in our teacher training?
I think that it's hard to pinpoint the specific factor that leads to inclusion not being fully achieved and actually just staying with integration. My personal guess is surely we teachers are not really trained on this matter. But again, this is not about individual teachers. This is about having inclusive schools. So if you're a teacher who do not master inclusive practices, and if you go to a school that does actually do that, you will eventually learn how to become a more inclusive a more inclusive teacher. So I would say that the problem with inclusive education is that we are asking teachers to be responsible, be accountable on inclusion when it's not on the teacher, but on the school. So I would say that that is the main factor. Schools are too worried about results, academic results, so they cannot shift to an inclusive paradigm. And since they cannot shift to that inclusive paradigm, even if there is an inclusive teacher, that inclusive teacher eventually will feel the pressure to go with the standards. So I think that the key issue here is to build an inclusive school, and that means an inclusive culture that leads to an inclusive policy to finally reach that inclusive practice. So I think that it all goes to the school.
Okay, thank you. Here you have another one. How would you manage the different English levels of proficiency in a class group to make them more confident and included?
I think that the English class has such a huge chance to include everyone, because when you check the curriculum, we are always talking about the same things. We're just changing the context, or maybe we're just adding certain expressions as years go on and go on. So when we talk about dealing with different competences, language competences and proficiencies in our classroom, what we are saying is, I want all students to be at the same level at the same time when that is not possible. But what we can do is to set a bare minimum. So I know that I have students who are really proficient on the language, and I know that there are students who are struggling with the language. So the material that I present to all my students is just the right amount of efforts, the right amount of complexity for the majority of our students. And when I get to work with my students, I create activities that appeal to every single English level. So you start your class with a very basic question. So what, just say, what colors can you see in the cover of this book? That is an answer that can be replied by those learners who are not really proficient at the language, and they will find a place in which they can practice what they know. So basically what you want to do is to create an English lesson that starts with an let's say, I don't want to use this word, but I think that's the first one that comes into my mind, a more basic structure or complexity, and you go developing from that point on to higher levels. So you start with a place where all students can participate. And as you go on with your class, those students who are struggling can work with those students who are more advanced in the language. So you have to provide a moment in your classroom in which all students can participate, and then you can start making groups so that those students who have master English to a greater extent can help those who haven't. I think that in my experience, that is one of the things that I have applied, especially with my 4th and 5th graders when I was a classroom teacher, and that really worked in that sense. But again, if we are always focusing on the standards, we will always feel that students are behind, because standards are something that is fixed and our students' needs are something that evolved every time. So I would say design a class that appeals to everyone's levels, from complex, from easy, I don't want to say, but easier activities at the beginning and harder activities at the end. So I think that is a way in which you can appeal to all these different English levels. But again, this is something I say out of the blue because I don't know your students, but in my experience with 4th graders, the English differences are not that big. So I could handle that very easily.
Okay, thank you very much, Sebastián. Once again, we thank you for your presentation, your participation, and of course, our speaker. It was a pleasure, okay? We remind you that at the end of the 2 days of presentation, you will be able to download the diploma of participation. We invite you to join us with our next speaker, Nick Pitchy, with tools and techniques for autonomous teachers development. Tomorrow at 9, following the link on website. We meet us tomorrow at 9 o'clock presentation. Thank you very much and have a nice day.